Okay, welcome everybody to another edition of the Phya Academy newsletter. We're continuing our investigation into the ancient athletic virtue of masculinity, and this is the fourth edition. Hello, beautiful people. It is always great to see you. I'm excited for another one of our lessons. And when thinking about masculinity, and remember, everybody on this list has access to all the previous lessons through the link that's at the bottom of the email. It's our playlist, right? So you can go back and check out all the previous lectures on masculinity, but also on the other virtues that we've been talking about, that we've been discussing. Pardon me. And the ideals of masculinity, when we're thinking about this ancient wisdom, this ancient athletic application, what we've been discussing is this notion of balance. And I thought the ideal man is the balanced of all of the best types of characteristics and qualities that are necessary to fulfill the obligations and duties of a man. And this got me thinking about the obligations and duties of athletes when thinking about their bodies, when thinking about their physical performance. And we live in a time and an era when the best athletes are specialists. They are trained to perform particular motions with particular parts of their bodies at particular times in order to accrue particular results. It's all very specialized. But that's not the ideal athlete. The ideal athlete isn't somebody who can just do one thing really well. It's a composite, it's a whole. And there is no greater athlete, I think, from the past 100 years or so that exemplifies the all-around greatness that we would want to see in a balanced athlete is Jim Thorpe, the very famous American Indian who transcended what it means to excel at many different sports. Let me just give you a quick rundown of the accolades that Jim Thorpe garnered in his athletic career. So Jim Thorpe was born towards the end of the 19th century, and he was a standout athletic star in collegiate football, playing for the Carlisle Indian School under the famous coach Pop Warner. He was a consensus All-American 2 years in a row in 1911 and 1912. Then in 1912, he went to the Summer Olympics, and he won 2 gold medals, one in the classic pentathlon and the other in the decathlon. So in events where you have to do 5 events and where you have to do 10 events, he won the gold medal in both of them. He then returned to the United States, where he played 6 years of professional baseball in the major leagues. And at the same time he was playing baseball, he was also a star player in the biggest professional football leagues at the time, the leagues that would eventually become the NFL. He also served as the president of that initial league and coached both professional baseball and football. So when we're thinking about the ideals of harmony and balance when it comes to the various parts of our bodies, Jim Thorpe exemplifies this notion of physical competence in all areas, as opposed to just being a track star, just being a football player, or just being a baseball player. Now, what's intriguing about Jim Thorpe is his intentions. And I love these quotes from this athlete. "I was never content unless I was trying my skill or testing my endurance. I have always liked sport and only played or run races for the fun of the thing." So it seems as if even though he's excelling in all of these different sports and playing and participating in them all, he's doing it for the love of it. He's doing it for the thrill. He's doing it for the challenge of coming up against adversity and of seeing if he can pass the test. And it's really shocking to think that Jim Thorpe, the double gold medal winner at the 1912 Stockholm Olympics, had his Olympic medals stripped away from him, very famously and very publicly. Now, this was because he had played semi-professional baseball. I believe it was in North Carolina for one summer. And at this point in time, if you wanted to be considered an amateur athlete, you had to be amateur in every single sport. So even though he wasn't a professional decathlete, the fact that he had taken money to play baseball disqualified him as an amateur, and they stripped away his medals. The IOC was wrong to do this. And 30 years after Jim Thorpe died, his medals were posthumously returned to him. But this is an egregious crime when we think about the intentions and the motivations of Jim Thorpe as to why he excels and why he uses sports as this vehicle for his own growth, for his own development, to reach his own potential. And when thinking about the ancients and how they viewed athletes, Jim Thorpe it's like that idea that you close your eyes and you think, like, what is the ideal athlete, both in terms of their physical abilities, their motivations, and it's Jim Thorpe. And who put that idea of the true athlete into the consciousness of the world? Well, that's the ancient Greeks, of course. And we've talked about ancient stories, ancient historians, myths, ancient poetry, but philosophy also has a tremendous amount to teach us. And I've oftentimes drawn on Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, these titans of Greek philosophy. And when thinking about masculinity, the ideals of balance and harmony, both in terms of our physical abilities, but also our moral characteristics, we have to turn to the philosopher, to Aristotle. Now, when thinking about balance and harmony and this notion of virtue or character traits, positive character traits that exemplify who we are and how we act, Aristotle defined virtue as the mean or the average or the middle point between excess and deficiency. So when we're thinking about athletic training, for example, don't just focus on being strong, that's excess, but also don't neglect to work on your physical strength, that's deficiency. The mean, where we can find virtue, is training a proper amount of strength that is balanced and proportionate to the other types of physical skills you need as an athlete. So, for Aristotle, the ideal athlete isn't somebody who can win just one event, but somebody who can compete well and win in a host of events. And this quote gives us a good sense of that. A body capable of enduring all efforts, either of the race course or of bodily strength. This is why the athletes in the pentathlon are most beautiful. And when we think about the reasons why Aristotle would even suggest that we should play sports in the first place, he says it is specifically to acquire moral character, to acquire virtue. So it's to find that middle ground. It's to find that harmony and balance. And how are we going to know when we've found it, or how are we going to understand it when we get there? It's through consistent training. It's through habituating this behavior so that it becomes automatic. So really, when we're training our characters, just as when we're training our bodies, we have to be intentional, we have to be purposeful, and we have to keep in mind this notion of balance and harmony. Now, for Aristotle, virtue only comes to those who act out of internal motivation. If you're motivated by external goods, riches, fame, status, you may be engaged in something that's not necessarily virtuous. It might not necessarily be immoral, but it's not like a claim to it's not a claim to moral strength. It's not a claim to a moral example. And when he says the pentathlon is the most beautiful, or the athletes who participate in the pentathlon are most beautiful, what he is relating here is a sense of truth, right? Because for the ancient Greeks, beauty was a revelation of truth beyond comprehension. So this means when we're trying to think about masculinity or manliness, it relates both to this notion of the internal drive, because that's where virtue comes from, but also to this notion and ideal of balance and harmony. And that's where I want to end off on today's lecture. What does it all mean? How do I find balance? How do I know what balance is? Because when we're thinking about what it means to be the right kind of a man, oftentimes we're presented with certain types of traits that are historically associated with masculinity without understanding the necessity of some undervalued and underappreciated character traits that we find maybe dissociated from masculinity. So what do I mean by that? When we think about masculinity, what are some of the words? Like, close your eyes. What are the words that like pop right into your head, right? It's like strength, right? Is probably one of the big ones. Maybe some people think about it in terms of like aggression, right? Or leadership, or discipline, determination, right? They're these hard words meant to display sort of a harsh characteristic. And this is certainly one element of masculinity, right? That drive, that determination, the heroism, right? Of facing adversity with a willful attitude, knowing that the adversity provides us with the obstacles, that adversity provides us with the opportunity to grow. But on the other hand, if we want a sense of balance, men can't just be strong, cold, resolute, and determined. Men also have to be genteel, compassionate, empathetic, tender at times. And this provides us with the absolute and adequate sense of what it means to be a proper man. It's balance, it's harmony, it's wisdom in knowing which virtues to apply in which specific circumstances. And this relates really nicely to both Aristotle's ideal of training for moral virtue and Jim Thorpe's example of physical competency wrought through his own internal drive. So Aristotle, right, he tells us that we acquire virtue through habituation, or moral character through habituation. We have to train ourselves to acquire these virtues, which means for masculinity, it's not enough to just accrue virtue. We have to intentionally go out and cultivate it ourselves. And that's not just the stereotypical elements of masculinity, but the balanced, harmonic whole of masculinity. And it must be done intentionally, and it must be done through the training of all of our faculties, right? When we're thinking about our potential for compassion, our potential for kindness, our potential for resoluteness, our potential for strength. They all have to be balanced off against each other. And this is exemplified, right, by the expressed excellence of Jim Thorpe's athletic career. And we can celebrate somebody like Jim Thorpe playing in all these professional leagues, winning at all of these incredible competitions, and understand he's doing so, again, from this internal perspective, right? I just want to go back to these quotes because they're so incredible. I was never content unless I was trying my skill or testing my endurance. It's never the external rewards, chasing victory, chasing money. It's that internal drive to challenge oneself and to enjoy them for their beauty, right? For the sake of themselves. And that's what Aristotle alights us to with his notions of acquiring moral character through training and habituation, but also his understanding that virtue is a balance between, again, excess and deficiency. And that's really what masculinity means. Masculinity is required solely because it provides a balance in the types of virtues that are necessary for men to grow into their full potential. So when we are thinking if you're somebody, if it doesn't even necessarily matter if you're a man or a woman. We all have a stake in the preservation and the sustenance of masculinity in our society, as again, as a balanced counterweight to femininity. It's the yin and the yang, and they both go beautifully together. But as men, we need to do a better job of cultivating the parts of our characters that we oftentimes don't associate with strong, right? Or of a manly man. And this doesn't take away from our masculinity. And in fact, it enhances our masculinity. You know, as the father of a young daughter, there's this meme that I always think about, you know, and it's this really rough and rugged guy who's, you know, he's kind of like outside. I think he's got like an axe or something, and it's just like this rough guy. He's like, there is no woman out there like who can melt the ice of my heart, like, or things like that. And then the bottom, it's like that same guy dressed up in angel wings and like a dress, having a tea party with his 3-year-old daughter, because that's what a dad should do. And does that make this guy any less manly? No, it actually makes him more manly. It's actually a much more positive understanding of masculinity because it's a balanced representation. That's why Aristotle loves the pentathlete. That's why Jim Thorpe provides an excellent model when thinking about translating his physical balance and his internal drive to our balanced understanding of masculinity and how we need to cultivate these virtues intentionally in order to make them a habit to us and part of our moral character moving forward. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you again in the next one, and have a great day.